Without further ado, I'll move to our first proposition speaker and to Belle Ribeiro. Belle Ribeiro-Addy has been the Labour Member of Parliament of Streatham since 2019. She's a self-described lifelong socialist and feminist and served as Shadow Minister for Immigration in 2020. Belle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. In starting, it's very important that we start with the premise that there are no amount of payments, no collection of acts that could ever recompense for the hundreds of years of enslavement, genocide, ecocide, the theft of national resources, colonialism, deliberate underdevelopment, and the forms of neocolonialism that persist today. The crimes against humanity that were slavery and colonialism were too great and the impact was too wide. But this is not an argument that we should do nothing at all. The word reparations is taken from the Latin word repare, to repair, to make amends, and I would argue that the focus needs to be on this repair, which is as much about moral and social equity as it is about financial compensation. This is what makes reparations much more about than the simplistic idea of handing over large sums of money to those who have been wronged. From racism to economic inequality and climate breakdown, so many of the problems that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people face in the global South and in this country have its undeniable roots in the crimes against humanity, namely slavery and colonialism. The notion that these events are too far past is completely flawed. They are very much present-day subjects and objects to the claim for reparations. The evidence of the unjustly derived wealth and how it was derived is all around us. The impoverished nations in the global South, the socioeconomic status of descendants of the enslaved, the auspices of institutions like this, our place in this world, our wealthy and industrialized cities, and our treasury. We cannot forget that when slavery was abolished, Britain took out a loan of the equivalent of £300 billion to pay off slave owners. We only finished paying off that loan in 2015. This means that for decades, the descendants of the enslaved, indentured, and colonized, including the Windrush generation, contributed to paying their own oppressors. So other than the obscene wealth that made this small island state one of the richest countries in the world, its citizens continued to pay financially for the slave trade after it ended. Not only by doing this have the government established it was possible to pay reparations, albeit by paying the oppressors instead of the oppressed, they've established that the funds are very much in our present, as have the individuals and institutions that continue to benefit from this wealth. And it's not just the wealth, it's the wronged that are also present today. The undeniable crimes against humanity are as well evidenced as are the continued effects in the form of global impoverishment and racism. If we deny the need for reparations because the crimes against humanity we refer to were a long time ago, that means we're denying the very real experience of the object of this claim, those for whom this impoverishment and racism exists. Lest we forget that race is an entirely social construct without any biological meaning, a human-invented classification system instituted and enforced primarily for the justification of owning human beings and for the purpose of free labor, subjugation, and theft. When we talk about reparations, we talk about repairing this imbalance which very much exists today. And if we cannot deny that the lasting effects of the original crime exist, and that means we can identify where reparations need to be made. And further to this, we cannot eradicate racism in our society until we accept and understand that its roots are in these past injustices and make meaningful reparations for the damage caused. Yet we continue to argue against it. If governments like our own don't believe that there's a reasonable claim for reparations, then why do they continue to refuse to make the direct apology that has been called for? One of the arguments that I often make myself is that it's because we only apologise to our equals, and the racism that persists in society means that a government like ours would never see those people that are most affected as equals. And that view very much remains for me. But the other is key to this argument because they've expressed deep regret, they've called it a stain on a nation's history, and they've feigned every other form of being apologetic without actually apologising. Could it be that they recognise their culpability and, like your average corporate body trying to avoid paying out for something that is so blatantly their fault, they go to great lengths to ensure that they do not use the recognised legal language for liability? They do not admit fault, not because they don't believe they're not at fault. They do not admit fault because they know they are at fault and simply do not want to pay the price for this. We make so many arguments against paying for reparations when there are so many ways that we could actually begin doing it today. Simple things like returning artefacts, an end to exploitative trade, cancelling debts that impoverished nations have paid over and over again, giving those former colonies the tools to deal with the effects of climate change, which are actually the product of European industrialisation, which itself was fuelled by colonial exploitation. And as many will know, there is a growing consensus in the museum sector. There is no justification for holding artefacts in British museums that were stolen through force. So I was really pleased to hear again today about Jesus College, Cambridge, taking the important step of restoring 2 looted Bonin bronzes to their rightful home. And Glasgow councillors recently voting to repatriate stolen cultural treasures. But there are thousands more right across this country, and the ultimate loot of empire in the basement of the British Museum. Finders, keepers was not an argument in the playground. It's not one that would work for our justice system, yet we continue to employ it when discussing these stolen items, even to the extent that we suggested that we loan these things that we've stolen back to the people we stole them from. Restitution as a form of reparations is one that can easily be addressed. Another one I wanted to look to was climate reparations. This week, COP27 was very much on the agenda. We're reminded that countries, including the US, Canada, and much of Western Europe, account for just 12% of the global population today, but are responsible for 50% of the planet-warming greenhouse gases released from fossil fuels and industry over the past 170 years. For the first time, COP was discussing matters related to funding arrangements and responding to loss and damage. These arguments suggest that funds will be provided by wealthy nations to vulnerable lower-income countries that bear little responsibility for climate warming emissions. Things such as cancelling the debts and free green energy, funds to address the direct impact of climate change are viable ways of reparations. And the arguments against reparations always seem to be about what we cannot do. The question is, why do we refuse to do what we actually can? And for those of you who would not succumb to the moral arguments for doing what is right, what I would put to you is probably going to be a very bad idea for us as a nation if we don't. As our governments continue to pander to nationalism across Europe, they would do well to remember that nationalism is not a uniquely Western concept. Many Commonwealth countries will only remember a past of exploitation and a present in which they're subjected to punitive IMF conditions, crippling their social infrastructure in serving the interests of more powerful countries like the UK. Countries in the global south have their own nationalists, and every one of them will tell you that they have achieved what they have in spite of Britain's atrocities, not because of aid or the privilege of being colonised. And as we leave our largest trading partner, or as we've left our largest trading partner, whatever your views on Brexit were at the time, I'm sure we can see quite clearly it is not working. We need to look to the fact that we need to reposition ourselves in the world. And we're not going to do that if we go around continuously flinging ourselves about as if there is still some sort of empire. We need to make friends. And we're not going to make friends if we continue to act in this disgraceful way which looks down on people in the global south. Because as I've said, they remember what has been done. And the longer we refuse to apologise, the harder it will be to maintain those relationships. So reparations isn't about reimagining the past. It's about reimagining a future that's actually built on equality, where we work towards building the equity that was denied to people because of the empire. We can start where we can by acknowledging our wrongs, actually apologising, actually accepting liability, and we return what is not ours. We work to address the imbalance and injustice in our society. If we can attest that something is wrong, how can we claim to hold onto the values of decency, respect, and equality that we preach constantly around the world? In this way, I see reparations is not only a necessity, it is completely feasible. Thank you.